Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fit Chicks Chat. My name is Amanda Quinn.
And my name's Laura Jackson.
And today we are actually diving into something that I think is pretty cool. We're talking about the history of diets and how to reframe our perspective on the word diet itself, as well as the idea of dieting. And I really wanted to talk about this week because I thought, one of the things, especially right now, we have our summer fast track for our holistic nutrition weight loss coaching program. And one of the things that comes up is that the word diet can sometimes trigger people in a certain way, and it can come up in a way that feels very negative. And so I thought by sharing what the history is of the actual word diet and where it actually comes from and the origin of that could be really fascinating and kind of eye-opening in the sense of like just giving us an opportunity to reframe a word that we sometimes see as a non-positive thing or even neutral, right? We don't necessarily have to see it as a positive, but sometimes even just bringing it to a neutral place as opposed to seeing the word diet and instantly thinking, oh my gosh, like instantly I think when people hear the word diet, they think I'm gonna be hungry, I'm gonna starve. It's, like, negative, it doesn't feel good, it's, like, triggering in a lot of different ways, so understanding where it comes from, I think, is one of the most important things because then we can build from there.
Well, and I think too, it's something that's I've always been fascinated by this, right? Because, you know, there's always this like pushback against certain words or certain thoughts, right? Like we don't want to put diets in the category that they just mean that we like, don't like ourselves and we're trying to change our bodies or lose weight or whatever it is. But at the same time, I always think it's about kind of taking the power back from that word or reframing that word and understanding what that word really means so it doesn't hit you in those ways. Because at the end of the day, it's like these words are going to exist, right? And there's so much of
Mhm.
this, anti diet culture. But then, in my opinion, all we're doing is we're reinforcing that it's a bad word. But it's not a bad word if you understand where it came from. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like this interesting. I like to have these conversations because I know for me that was a huge piece of my weight loss journey, my health journey, and really falling in love with taking care of my body and focusing not just on the scale and things like that, was reframing the way I looked at a lot of the words that were
Mhm.
associated with weight loss and dieting, and kind of reframing that for me in a way that didn't make me feel triggered or like it was a negative.
Totally, and I know we talk a lot about this in our holistic nutrition program because we do talk about, like, the mindset and how to actually coach people through that, like, shift between, like, how they see things. So that's why I just thought, what better time than to talk about, like, the actual history behind it also because 'cause we're, like, super nerds and we like to learn these things. So I thought it was really cool to do this, like, research and find out where does the word diet even come from? So the word diet actually comes from a Greek word, and I may say this wrong, so please do not do not take this
I
negatively
gotta
if I
brush
say
up
the
on
word
my
wrong.
Greek, my
I
Latin.
but I believe it's dieta. I could be saying it wrong. If anyone's listening and you know that I am definitely pronouncing it wrong, I apologize. And but it comes from a Greek foundation, which essentially meant way of life or manner of living. So it wasn't about what people ate. It actually encompassed a whole lifestyle, including habits, daily activities, and general health. And it actually came. So the Greek philosopher Hippocrates, who is often referred to as the father of medicine, he used this term to describe the way of life that was conducive to good health, involving food, exercise, and other lifestyle factors. So it didn't come from this place of always just focusing on diet because and diet meaning the way that we eat. It actually came from just this idea. And I love this, the idea of it really meant way of life or manner of living. Because when we think about it from that perspective, it shifts it now from a negative to just like a neutral place, right? Because it encompasses everything in terms of how you are conducting your day-to-day activities as opposed to just having it as like this is what I eat, this is what I do. And so over time the word diet actually evolved, particularly in the English language. And it became more narrowly focused on food consumption and was often associated with weight loss or health related food restrictions. And the shift was crucial because this is what transformed diet from a holistic lifestyle approach to something that was more restrictive and for many mostly negative. And so I thought that was really fascinating because if we really look back at it, it doesn't actually mean anything negative, or it shouldn't, but we have created this negative connotation around that word over the years.
Well, and the thing too is, I love me some Hippocrates. Like he is the one who said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." Like
Exactly.
his whole view on nutrition was that it was there to fuel the body, heal the body, maximize, the body's health as one piece of the health puzzle. And,
Mhm.
I also think too, though, like over time, it's we just kind of shorten stuff, right? Because if you do think about it, saying diet and to do with all of those things, like a holistic approach, because the reality is there's so many different styles of diet. So there is even like as a holistic approach, there's not just one way of looking at that because some people, right, they thrive on, for example, a keto diet, while others thrive more on a plant-based diet. Like we're all so individual. So
Mhm.
it's just kind of like we just shortened it, but then, it really is the marketing, right?
I was
Marketers
gonna
needed a
say
way marketers needed a way
to
to be
sell.
like, "Okay, exactly. How do we simplify instead of saying, this is something that's gonna help you lose weight, or this is a weight loss plan." They just started shifting into, "This is a diet." And that is
Yeah.
something that's fascinating too, because I always say this to our students, like, I always say there's different dietary strategies. So
Mhm.
to me, that's the way I say diet, 'cause it's like there's a strategy for like how we're going to eat. So maybe it is again that you're trying to balance blood sugar, or that you are trying to lose weight, or that you are trying to if you're dealing with inflammation, right? Like if you look now, there's so many different types of diets, and I look at them not necessarily as again just a way of eating. I look at it as a dietary strategy that's usually used because of an outcome that you want.
Yeah.
So I just yeah, it's so interesting to me how, like, over time, we've just kinda simplified this incredible world because I studied like, when I was younger, I was so fascinated with, religions around the world and also diets around the world, and that's still one of my dreams is if I could retire tomorrow, I would love to eat my way around the world and study all the different cultures, because
Mhm.
there's so much in the way that we eat, right, that has also when you look at the health of different countries, a lot of it boils back down to the diets that they had even way back in the day, like as their culture. And then we look at the standard American diet, and everyone's sick, right? It's like where everyone's leaning more towards that. Our obesity rate is so high, our illness rate is so high. But that would be what I would love to do because I just find it so fascinating how we all have these different diets based on where we live or what our goals are or what we're trying to heal. And it's something that again is different for everybody. There is no one size fits all based on so many different factors. But
Actually
marketers are just
reminds
really
me.
good.
Well, yeah, 2 things on that. I mean, number 1, that reminds me of the conversation you and I had when we were climbing the Inca Trail and how we started filming ourselves. So if anyone's listening right now and you're like a TV producer and you want us
Yeah.
to develop a show, we had this whole show idea around that, around where in the world are the chicks, and us basically exploring all of the different eating approaches and styles for like what people do in different countries and different areas and different
Yes.
small little remote areas, that what they're doing for health, because there are people in the world that are living to like 120, 100. What are they doing? That's so fascinating to me. So if anyone wants us to film that show, call us.
Yeah, let's
Uh,
manifest, putting it out there.
but the other thing that I wanted to say is like just around the whole thing around marketing, it's that's why I think like looking at the history of where the word came from was so cool to me, because it was like all marketers have done is taken the word and basically just taken ownership of it and put it into a negative connotation. That's it. Really, they've just said, oh, that word, it encompasses everything to do with health. Let's just take it and make it all about what we want. We're going to direct the narrative as opposed to making it something that is just this neutral place. We're going to make it so that it becomes this negative thing. And so it's just, I don't know, it's so interesting. And so diets though, and what I want to talk about now is like the history of diets. So diets is actually like dieting is not something that is new. And so I want to just talk about like where they even started, which I thought was so cool too. So the concept of dieting is actually something that ancient Egyptians were even known to practice. So dieting meaning like food restriction or concerned about health and well-being. So they were actually concerned with keeping a slim figure and believed clean diets would ensure purity and health. And so ancient Egyptians were already starting to kind of look at like shifting the way that they were eating and basically monitoring what they were doing on a day-to-day basis. So I thought that was cool, but also, and I don't know if you know this, Laura, but in the 19th century, there was actually, that was when the first low carb diet was actually created. So it was actually created by this guy named William Banting, and he's an English undertaker. And he had a pamphlet that was called Letter on Corpulence. And it was a diet. So instead of it being called like Atkins or something, it was called the Letter on Corpulence. And it was outlined a diet that restricted bread, sugar, and beer. So super
Well,
fascinating. Like
it is
it's
basically William Banting is very known in like a lot of circles when it comes to nutrition, because he really was the one who first, started sharing about a lower carb diet, and see, like, he basically was like, if you want to lose weight, cut out bread, cut out sugar, cut out processed foods, cut out beer, which
beer.
again is very starchy. But like, it wasn't
Yeah.
just those three things. There was like more of it in, but and then he talked about focusing on things like basically meats, greens, fruits, drier wines. Like, again, you not saying, because a lot of people back in that day was like, you drink beer or you drink wine, right?
Right.
So it was moving into to that way. And it's really interesting because a lot of those principles still do apply today. If you're eating sugar and starch and processed foods and lots of beer, you are not going to reach your goals. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's something that a lot of sugar, like because back then too it was like a lot of pastries and stuff like that. But it was just very simple. And actually, in the Obesity Code, which is one of my favorite books by Dr. Jason Fung, he actually talks a lot about this, and how, like, it's fascinating how we try to change so many things over time, but really, the core of what works when we really look into it, um, is still very similar.
Well, no, and that is what's so fascinating about this is that it's like, obviously, the way that he described it as the letter on corpulence probably wasn't so gimmicky as like something like Atkins. And so then, to bring it back into market it, this like in now the 20th century, it was like, okay, how do we market this differently? How do we take the same concept, but then how do we package it in a different way and make it something that becomes like this mainstream sort of thing, right? And so I don't know, I find this stuff really fascinating. Also, I didn't know this, but in the 20th century, this is when calorie counting and the introduction of the first commercial diet plans came into place. It was actually in the 1960s. Weight Watchers was born, and the 1990s, the Atkins diet became a household name. So if you look at like the history of it, it's not that it's not that like these diets are like these brand new, like these fad diets and all these things that are coming out are like these brand new concepts. It's really just basically taking these concepts and then repackaging them and remarketing them and, giving you a different way of looking at it from a different viewpoint. But it's really just taking all of these baseline concepts and then making it something different and shiny and new and then marketing it to you in a different way. And so,
Well, the
you
thing
know,
too, though, that I found was, this is where things got really wonky, was around that
mhm,
time. Because
yeah,
again, if you go back to like the 19th century, it was talking about, there wasn't this idea of really counting calories. It was like avoiding or not like limiting the amount of foods, like restricting, and say don't have them, but like limiting the amount of consumption of these like processed foods, these highly refined carbohydrates.
mhm,
And also he talks about portion control, right? And then it's like you said, in the 20th century, it's like we needed a new spin to make this interesting. So people are like, wait a second, if we talk about like energy expenditure, which and energy consumption, right? So calories in, calories out, that's energy balance. If we burn more than we consume, then the idea is that we will lose weight. So we're like, okay, let's take that concept and kind of repackage it. But we took out, a lot of these diets took out the quality of the food that was included in those calories. So that's when it really became like the fat, fat will make you fat. And all of this fake food started coming in, or Weight Watchers. It was like, as long as you fill your points, it doesn't matter what you fill them with, as long as you're within your caloric range.
yeah.
Right. And then when we saw Atkins come out, that's when, a lot of people did see great results. But then, of course, we changed that to be very packaged and processed too. But it was really around that time because we stopped talking about nutrition and we just started focusing on these calories, not saying that it doesn't matter how we fill the calories as long as we are cutting calories. And then that's what
Such a
really
good point.
solidified this diet of like, diet is around restriction. Like I asked, so when we were talking about doing this podcast, I asked a couple of my family members, I was like, when I say the word diet, what are the words that come to your mind first? And the
Mm,
first words were restriction, weight loss, low calorie, and hard. Like those were
yeah.
all like, you know what I mean? Like all of those things to me, restriction, hard, weight loss to me doesn't have a negative word, but like counting like all of those things feel very negative, right? So of course we
Hmm.
created this negative relationship. And also because the way these diets have been structured, people can't stick to them. They're not sustainable. They're not real life and they're not healthy for you for the long term, especially if you are, just restricting calories and not focusing on the quality of your food. Then what ends up happening is then you feel like diets are something that are unattainable for you. You can never quote unquote follow a diet. And then it just becomes this whole spin cycle, which again, that's where this whole diet culture kind of really came from.
Yeah, no, and it's such a good point. Now, so okay, so taking that on that note, then how do we shift the narrative, right? So that's the big question is like, okay, so now we understand like the history, we understand where the word really came from. So how do we shift the narrative of and reclaim the word diet to reflect either a positive or even a neutral concept rather than making it a restrictive word or guilt-inducing or feeling like hard or overwhelming or any of those things. So I think the first thing is really just going back to the original meaning. Like I said in the very beginning, when we look at the history of it, the word diet meant a way of life. So when we think of diet in that context, it's not about restriction, but rather than about choices. It's about what we choose to nourish our body with, how we decide to move, and the overall habits that we use to contribute to our well being versus thinking about restricting, right? So when we think about adding to our life, like, oh, I'm going to choose this and I'm going to make this choice because this fuels my body to give me energy to do these things, it's a totally different way of thinking versus consistently thinking, I can't do this. I can't have this. I can't. Because when you live in that state of like, I can't eat this, I can't do this, I can't go out for dinner because of this. When we think about it from that perspective, it puts us into such a negative place. And it puts us into a place too where we want to fight back consistently. I don't know if anyone listening has ever felt like that self-sabotage as soon as you say, oh, well, I can't eat bread because I don't eat bread because I'm on this Atkins diet or I'm on this diet or whatever it is. Immediately, the only thing you're going to think about for the rest of your day is bread. Right? And it's like that's what our brain is going to do to us consistently because we're putting restrictions on ourselves. But instead, if we can change it and think about it as this is about choices, and I'm just going to make choices that nourish my body. I'm going to decide how I move my body, and I'm going to think about my overall habits that contribute to my well-being. It changes the narrative immediately.
Well, and
The
I
other
also,
thing, sorry,
oh, sorry,
go
go ahead.
on. Yes? No, no, please go on.
No, I was just gonna say, I also think it's really powerful to start off. Again, we're gonna talk about some tips to reframe, but when you're first thinking about that, like, I think the very first important thing is to ask yourself the question I asked my friends and family, like, what comes up for you when you hear the word diet? What is your
Yeah.
initial reaction? Because that is your current thought patterns about diets. And it could be different.
Hmm.
You could be like, I don't know, I don't really think about it. Or it could be like, oh, I hate dieting or having a really strong reaction, but just even asking yourself that question, because again, it's very easy to say, like, oh, I want something to be neutral. But if we don't even understand how we currently think about it, then it's really hard to change it. Right. So it's just like
Totally.
asking yourself that and seeing what comes up for you and then looking at that and then questioning too, like, that's interesting. Why do I think that? And it
Yeah.
might be because your mother, like for me, my mom went, I remember clearly going on my very first diet at the age of between 12 and 13, and my mother was on a diet. And then I started doing the diet thing with her. And it wasn't like back then, you know what I mean? It wasn't like she was like, oh, I hate my body, blah, blah. She's just like, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds. And it was like this I'm like, okay. And then suddenly it was like that diet culture started for me. And then I went like down the rabbit hole with it. And of course, because I was doing so many things that were, not good for my body, I was having so much bounce back and weight gain and constantly then, because that's what a lot of, again, the marketers want, they want you in this cycle. So I would just start by digging into that a little bit deeper because, it's very easy for us to say these things, but to actually implement them is really personal and very
Mhm.
different.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I also think too, even when you think about foods, think about, are you labeling your foods as good or bad? Are
Yeah.
you seeing them as like positive or negative foods? And if you are, understand, can we shift that mindset and shift the way that you're doing that into some foods I eat for nourishment, like meaning I'm fueling my body, I'm giving my body what it needs, I'm making a choice to eat these things, like I'm choosing to eat the broccoli because I know it's going to give me all these vitamins and nutrients and it's going to feed my body in the right way. And then other foods you're going to eat for pleasure, and that's okay. But understanding the balance between that and also understanding that everything is a choice. So you don't have to make anything as like, oh, cake is so horrible. Instead, just make it neutral. If you make a choice to have a piece of cake, then just make that choice, but be conscious about the choice. And then instead of thinking about like salad as like this glorified decision, just think of it as neutral. Like if we can just think about it from a perspective of no foods are really necessarily good or bad. It's just food and it's just a choice of how you're choosing to fuel your body. It helps to like diminish the feeling of like this is a positive or a negative, right? It just puts you into a neutral place of like, okay, I've made the choice to eat this for pleasure. I've made this choice to eat this because, and I mean, broccoli might also be for pleasure, right? I love broccoli, but it's really just thinking about how can we just take away that good and bad connotation of even around the foods that we're eating and the food choices that we're making to make it sort of like a neutral place. So that's definitely something to
Well,
look at is how you're labeling your own foods and what you're
100%.
consuming.
And I always say in certification, I always call it nutritionally dense and not so nutritionally dense food.
Right,
Like
which
look
I
at the food
love.
that has the most nutritional bang for its buck. So it's like, where am I getting the biggest return? If I,
Yeah.
where am I getting the most return for these calories? But I do want to say too, it's fascinating because so many times it's like like when we're saying, oh, we glorify these certain foods as healthy and then we demonize these foods. But I also want to encourage you guys to think of the vice versa. Like, don't glorify the cake. That's what so many people do. It's like the cake is bad, but then on the flip side, the cake is so good, right? It's
Yeah,
this
yeah.
thing of like the cake is pleasure, the cake is a treat, the cake is all of this. And then this becomes, and then it's like on a pedestal while it's being something like the forbidden fruit. You know what I mean? Which then at the same time, and then also in your mind being like glorifying salads or whatever as a health food, but then also demonizing at the same time of being like, but they're not as good as the cake. And that's
Yeah.
something that I've seen a lot with people because it's like there's this whole idea around like, okay, but we've got to allow ourselves to have quote unquote treats. But even putting foods in a treat category makes them feel like cheat meals, right? It makes them feel more forbidden and more desirable because human nature is we want what we can't have. Right. As soon as we say
Yeah.
we can't have something, it's like we want it more. So it's just very important that like that's why when we talk about nutritionally dense, not so nutritionally dense, it's just like, okay, am I choosing? I want to fill the majority of my day with nutritionally dense food. 80% of my food intake every day is going to come from real whole foods, nutritionally dense. And then I've got 20% for foods that are not so nutritionally dense or food like products. Because yeah, that's the other thing too. I don't want to get on a tangent about this, but there's so many things that aren't actual food that we categorize as food because they've been marketed to us as food.
Yeah.
Cereal is not food. Corn
Yeah.
pops are not food, right? Certain granola bars are not food. Like these are not actual food. They are chemically altered food like products, a lot of them, right? They have some
Hmm.
food in it. So it's just like
Yeah.
that's the stuff that, it's really, I think it's just trying to find that space where, we're not putting any of these foods in any categories. It's just like some contain more nutrition. Some have all the vitamins, the minerals, the proteins, the carbs, the fats our bodies need to thrive, and some of them don't. And we just want to try to fill
Mhm.
most of our day with one but leave room if we are going to have some of these not so nutritionally dense foods that we're not going to go into a spiral feeling like we're quote unquote bad.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, and you know how you were saying earlier about like the glorification of like, oh, but the cake is so good and then but I should eat the salad or things like that. Have you ever seen that commercial? I don't know what it's for. Um, it's some sort of like a food product or something, or like I think it might be for like Splenda maybe or something. I'm not exactly sure, but and it's like a commercial where it's like shows a plate with like a sandwich and fries and then they're like want and then it'll be like a salad, a plate with a sandwich and salad and it's like should. It's like want should, but it's like such a it plays on that exact
Yeah.
mentality of like the positive and the negative, right? And it's like, oh, I really want that, but I should have this. And it's like, I really want this, but I should have this. But then, and I think it is for like some artificial sweetener, because then it's like, but you can have everything if you have this, right? And it's like this whole, but it's just marketing, and it's crazy how it does that. So sorry, I just thought of that
Well,
because I was
and
like, oh my
it's
gosh, the idea of the villainizing certain foods and glorifying certain foods, it's like prevalent even in marketing, and you can see it.
but it's even like, there's such a fine line even in the health coaching world where, and I get asked this question a lot by students, how do we be able to promote health without making people feel bad or making it like, because there's a big surge, right, in social media around this body positive anti-diet culture, that if you
Mhm.
talk about anything to do with nutrition or health or weight loss, it's like this like lashing out or this backlash around like, that's so negative, you can't say those things, blah blah blah, right? And I don't think that that serves us either. Like, I truly feel like we can be body positive and self-loving and also want to lose weight. We also can focus on our health and, not saying like, because I was following this one girl and she's like, if I see one more thing about like how important vegetables are, she's like, I'm healthy, and I'm still like, I still eat all the things. And then she's like in the video, like eating all these like no, non-food like products. And
Yeah,
it's like, yes, but at the same time, don't push that narrative that focusing on health is a negative thing. Because then a lot of people get confused as soon as they do, if they do want to lose weight, now they're going against, loving themselves. And it's just, I think we've got to stop pitting it all against it. And I also think it's just really important to get quiet, like I was saying, and for yourself, like look at what your current thoughts are around it. Look at, where are the things that you are feeling a reaction to. This is what I did. I had a lot of that, like the good, the bad foods, which is why I shifted it. I really looked at where I was having, getting triggered reactions. And again, a lot of this is unwinding stuff from since you were little, like going on
for
diets,
sure.
what you've heard as a little girl, what you've heard as a little boy, like all of these things around how we should eat or how we should look. And it's just, but finding where you're really feeling that resistance, because the truth is nutrition really matters. And I will never stop saying that to people. It's the most important thing, in my opinion, that you can control that will completely change your health and your life, right?
Mhm.
It really, really matters. So we've got to try to encourage people to get more nutrition in their life. But when we're using it as just a tool for weight loss, then all we're doing is we're forgetting what it's really about, which is back to the beginning, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food, right? It's there to serve you, it's there to nourish you, it's there to make your body healthy so you can do the things that you want in the world. And I just think that we have to stop looking at it as this tool in this diet culture and start talking about nutrition for what it really is.
Love that. That felt like a mic drop moment. That was really great. I totally agree with you. Now, I mean, so on that note too, and like looking, you were saying like the mindset and like how to kind of look at your mindset. We're gonna share with you a couple of different ways that you can like practical ways too, that you can really not only like what Laura said about like getting quiet and really reflecting on what these words mean to you and how you see your own diet and how you see your own decisions and choices and how things are triggering you, but also some other things that you can do to help reframe your mindset. So, the first thing is just educate yourself, right? Learn about nutrition, listen to your body. The more that you understand how different foods feel in your body, how they affect you, how they feel emotionally, how they may trigger you, what you're seeing in terms of if you're seeing it as a positive or a negative, and all these things. When you educate yourself not only externally on how food and what foods to use to nourish your body, but also just how you self reflect, the better equipped you'll be able to make those choices that are going to serve you. So that's the first thing for sure. And education is always just going to be power, right? Understanding things and knowledge is power. So that's definitely the first thing from a practical standpoint. The second thing that you can do as well is focus on habits, not just outcomes. So like what Laura was saying, like instead of fixating on a scale or a clothing size or focusing on anything that is like, what's the end result that I'm doing this diet for? Let's focus on building healthy habits that you can sustain long term. You've got to create something. You have to look at your health as a way of this is my way of life. This is not just something that I'm doing for this short term fix. And when you do shift that and it becomes about this is how I nourish my body, and these are my principles, and these are my beliefs around nutrition and health and diet and my overall well-being, that's when big changes happen. And that's when you can sustain it for the long term. And you're not going to be looking for the next quote unquote fad diet that's out there to be able to jump on it, to be able to get the results that you want.
I just one thing I want to say, I talked about this a lot on
Mhm.
last week's podcast. And I also think, focusing on habits, not outcomes, is a great way to say it. And I also think about your habits like you're learning a new skill set, right? So many times we think habits we should just have overnight. And it's like, okay, looking at, I'm going to start to build a skill set for myself that is going to help promote health for the long term. So you
Yeah.
don't have to be perfect. Like when I think of it like you're building a skill, it's like there's none of this, oh my gosh, I quote unquote cheated and now I just forget it. Like I've been, having protein at every single meal and then I didn't do it for the weekend. Oh, I suck at this, right? We don't say that to a toddler or a little infant who's learning how to walk. We don't say, oh, you tried to walk 20 times, you're never going to walk. So when you think about it like a
Exactly.
skill, like, hey, I'm learning a skill. Okay, I'm getting the skill. I'm training myself to learn, do this skill. I'm going to mess up. I know that's going to happen. It's not going to be perfect. And then eventually you will perfect that skill over time.
100%. I think that that's such an important thing. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that oftentimes we are so hard on ourselves, and that actually feeds into the third thing too, is like, be kind to yourself during this process, not only just as you're learning the skill, but it's easy to fall into like a trap of negative self-talk, especially when it comes to food and body image. And you may have been using negative self-talk for your entire life, right? This has been something I know even for me, I went through. There's I mean, I can't even think of how many years I spent fixating on numbers and scales and how my body image, and doing it in such a negative place. And to replace that, to go from like the negative side to then being positive, is almost impossible, right? So think about it from the perspective, and I know we've talked about this in the podcast before, but think about, how can I just be kind to myself, and how can I just do it from a neutral place? Remember that, you know, if you do fall off one day, or you eat something that is not part of like nourishing your body in the way that you wanted to, or you decide to just not do your workout one day because you're exhausted or something, just think of that as like, is this really a negative, or am I actually really supporting myself in this moment right now because I am exhausted and I need rest, right? And all of these things are important. So, how can we look at things, and instead of making them a negative or a positive, not just around food, but also around the way that we see our actions and our thoughts, how can we do it from a neutral place as well? And that's going to take a ton of time, especially if you're someone who has and I don't mean to make that sound like this impossible task, but if you're someone who's done this for a long time, especially with negative self-talk, or like looking at things from a negative place for your own health journey, it can be really hard to get to that place. So just know, again, that's a big skill that takes time to learn, but just keep practicing it over and over again, and think about it as every single moment, every single decision is my choice, and it's also a new opportunity to make a decision towards the goal that I want, which is to live a healthy life, and basically to just, going back to the definition of what diet truly means. And then the fourth thing that you can do in terms of like practical tips for reframing your mindset is to seek support, right? So if you are on this journey and you are thinking like, I don't really know how to like move through this, I'm having a difficult time, I'm running into some personal roadblocks when it comes to diet, I've had a lot of like maybe a negative relationship around that word, around food, around any of these things, seek support, whether it's friends, nutritionists, support groups, any kind of professionals, any therapists, anything that you need to help you and support you. Because let's be honest, like when it comes to diet, or the word diet, or body image and all of these things, oftentimes, like Laura said, it comes from like childhood and up, right? And so when it comes from that place, sometimes we have a lot of unpacking to do, and we do need that extra support. So just know that if you feel like you need that, reach out and find that. Find the community, find the person, find any support that you need to be able to help you through that journey. Because once you get to the other side and you're able to then take back that power, it's like one of the most freeing feelings that you can have. Like Laura, I know that you've transformed your whole health, and I know you talked about it on last week's podcast, but would you say that now the way that you see your health, and the way that you when you look back 20 years ago and you look at who you are today, is it literally the most freeing feeling in the world for you?
Yeah. And I do want to say too, though, there is no, I want to say two things. Number one,
Yeah.
I still struggle at times, but I now have the skill set to be able to manage it. That's the difference, right? I'm
Mm.
aware now when those thoughts start coming in. I'm like, oh, wait a second, what's going on here? Why is that happening? What's going on in my life right now? Am I doing, taking care of myself the way I need to? So it still comes up, but it's building a skill set to be able to approach it and understand it differently. But the second thing is, and I said this a few podcasts ago, my lesson this year, and it's so true for everything, is you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you've got to go through it. And that's something that for me, I don't even sometimes recognize that woman. I have to really think about her sometimes because literally my entire brain space was constantly taken up by my body. Like I
Diet.
had no space to think about my career or falling in love or enjoying my dog or anything. You know what I mean? Like I was so every ounce of my thought was focused on my physical body and how much I hated myself and all of that. And it's so exhausting and it's also so limiting. So that's why too I love teaching and coaching about weight loss and about nutrition and mindset and habits because it's not just about changing your physical body. If you are someone who struggles in that area, it literally is like unlocking not just 50 pounds maybe of weight, but 200 pounds of emotional baggage that you've been carrying around that is holding you back. Like that's what I felt like I visually think about it as is like you've got those chains with like the weights in the water and you can't get out. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter how hard you swim, you are being held down. And
Yeah.
we have big lives to live and we have big things all of us do, whether it be in our family, whether it be with our friends, in our careers, contributing to the world. Like we have such big things to give. And when that is something that is holding you back and it doesn't have to be, it's so heartbreaking for me because I know what that feels like. So
Mm.
you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you've got to go through it. And that's going to mean learning new skills, facing some things head on that might be ugly and you don't want to deal with them. Letting go of past beliefs and being open to new beliefs and new habits and new things, right? But it is there for you on the other side. So if you are someone who dieting and nutrition and this whole culture has been something that has been really challenging for you, I really want you to know that you have a home at Fit Chicks Academy, and we'd love to meet you and grow with you and share with you because this is all the stuff we talk about in the Holistic Nutrition Weight Loss Coach certification.
Exactly. And so if you are on that note, if you are interested in learning for yourself or for to become a coach, if you're an aspiring coach, if you're a coach who wants to continue to learn and grow, or if you are someone who is just wanting to learn for your own journey and you really just want to be able to get these skills to be able to support you even more. Check it out at fitchicksacademy.com/HWLC. That is where you can go to learn more about our summer fast track program that is open for enrollment right now. So that's it for today. That was our brief history on the word diet, where dieting has come from, how it has evolved over the years, and then, of course, looking forward, how we can shift that mindset around the word diet and around the habits that we have. So thank you all so much for listening. We will see you again next week on Fit Chicks Chat. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.